The Republic's fatal trust in the clone army began with a mix of desperation and deceit. At the time, the galaxy stood on the precipice of war, plagued by increasing separatist tensions and a deteriorating sense of unity. The Republic, stretched thin and lacking a formal standing military, found itself unprepared to deal with the looming conflict. Amidst this chaos, the discovery of a massive clone army commissioned in secret became a turning point, one that would ultimately seal its fate. The origin of the clone army itself was shrouded in mystery. Jedi Master Sifo Dyas, reportedly acting without the approval of the Jedi Council, commissioned the army on behalf of the Republic. However, Sifo Dyas's role was only part of the story. Unbeknownst to the Republic and the Jedi, the Sith Lord Darth Sidious orchestrated the creation and implementation of the clone army. Sidious, operating under the guise of Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, manipulated every aspect of its development to ensure his grand plan would succeed. From the outset, the clone army represented a paradox for the Republic. The clones were bred for loyalty and efficiency, programmed to follow orders without hesitation. To the politicians and military strategists on Coruscant, this seemed like a solution to their problems, a ready-made force capable of combating the separatist threat. But this very loyalty was their undoing, for it was not to the Republic itself that the clones were ultimately bound, but to Sidious and his hidden commands. The Jedi Order, despite their long-standing commitment to peace and mediation, became unwitting generals in this new war. They were thrust into leadership roles within the Grand Army of the Republic, overseeing countless clone troops in battles across the galaxy. Initially, the clones appeared to be ideal soldiers, disciplined, skilled, and unwavering in their dedication. However, the Jedi failed to fully grasp the implications of commanding a force whose ultimate loyalty was dictated by hidden programming. Throughout the Clone Wars, the Republic leaned heavily on the clone army, funneling immense resources into maintaining and expanding its capabilities. This dependency was both a strategic necessity and a reflection of the Republic's deteriorating state. Politicians on Coruscant, driven by fear and a desire to maintain control, placed their trust in the clones as a bulwark against chaos. Yet, in doing so, they failed to address the systemic issues that had allowed the separatist movement to flourish in the first place. As the war dragged on, the Republic's reliance on the clone army deepened. The clones were deployed to countless worlds, from the barren deserts of Geonosis to the city-covered expanse of Coruscant itself. Each victory won by the clones further entrenched the belief that they were indispensable to the Republic's survival. The Jedi, too, became increasingly reliant on their clone counterparts, forming close bonds with them on the battlefield. Yet these relationships masked a deeper truth: the clones were a tool, designed not to preserve the Republic but to facilitate its downfall. One of the most insidious aspects of the clone army was its hidden purpose. Each clone carried within them a biochip, an implant designed to execute Order 66, a command that would compel them to turn on the Jedi without question. This contingency plan, embedded in their very genetic code, was the ultimate betrayal. When the time came, the clones would follow this order with the same unwavering loyalty they had shown throughout the war. The Republic's failure lay not just in its blind trust in the clone army, but in its broader inability to perceive the machinations of Sidious. Palpatine, as Supreme Chancellor, masterfully played both sides of the conflict, orchestrating events to consolidate his power. He presented himself as the Republic's savior, guiding it through the trials of war, while secretly engineering its downfall. The clone army was his greatest tool, a weapon wielded under the guise of protection and stability. Even as the war escalated and the cost in lives and resources mounted, the Republic continued to place its faith in the clone army. Few questioned the ethical implications of breeding a force solely for war, nor did they consider the long-term consequences of such reliance. The clones, for their part, fulfilled their roles with precision, unaware of the dark purpose for which they had been created. In the final days of the Clone Wars, the Republic's trust in the clone army reached its zenith. Victory seemed within reach, and the Separatists were on the verge of collapse. Yet, it was precisely at this moment of apparent triumph that Sidious's plan came to fruition. With the execution of Order 66, the clones turned on their Jedi commanders, systematically eliminating them in a galaxy-wide purge. The Republic's defenders became its executioners, and the Jedi Order, already weakened by years of war, was all but destroyed. The aftermath of Order 66 marked the culmination of the Republic's fatal trust in the clone army. What remained was not the democratic institution it had once been, but the Galactic Empire, an authoritarian regime with Palpatine at its head. The clones, once hailed as heroes of the Republic, now served as enforcers of the Emperor's will. Their loyalty, so prized by the Republic, had been the instrument of its downfall. The tragedy of the Republic's reliance on the clone army lies not only in the destruction it wrought, but in the lessons it failed to learn. The trust placed in the clones was symptomatic of a larger failure: the inability to address the root causes of the galaxy's division and the blind acceptance of militarization as a solution to political problems. In the end, the Republic's trust was not just misplaced, it was weaponized against it, leading to the rise of an empire and the loss of freedom for countless worlds. The Republic's downfall serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of placing unchecked trust in tools of war, especially when those tools are shaped by unseen hands. The clone army, for all its effectiveness, was never a symbol of the Republic's strength, but a testament to its vulnerability. The Republic's downfall can be traced to a single pivotal decision: its unrelenting trust in the clone army. When the galaxy faced the rising tide of separatism, the Republic found itself vulnerable, lacking the military might necessary to combat such a widespread insurrection. The sudden emergence of a fully trained and equipped army of clones seemed like a divine solution to a dire problem. Yet this solution carried within it the seeds of destruction, planted by forces operating in the shadows. The clone army was introduced to the Republic under the guise of necessity. With systems seceding and the separatists amassing their own droid armies, the Senate was quick to embrace the clones. Their efficiency and loyalty were seen as virtues, a stark contrast to the disorder and factionalism that plagued the Republic's political landscape. From the moment these soldiers marched onto the battlefield, they were hailed as saviors, defenders of democracy. But this trust was misplaced. The clones themselves were engineered for obedience. Their genetic modifications ensured unwavering loyalty to the chain of command. This characteristic, lauded as a strength, was in fact their most dangerous trait. Every clone carried within them a hidden directive: Order 66, a command that, when activated, would turn them against the Jedi, the very leaders they had fought alongside for years. This contingency, unbeknownst to the Jedi and the Senate, was the keystone of a grand Sith conspiracy. As the Clone Wars raged on, the Republic grew increasingly dependent on the clones. This dependency went beyond mere battlefield reliance. The clones became deeply embedded in the Republic's identity. They were symbols of unity in a time of crisis, a force that brought together countless star systems under the banner of shared resistance against tyranny. Yet this very unity was a facade, orchestrated to serve the ambitions of a Sith Lord operating under the guise of Supreme Chancellor Palpatine. The Jedi Order, guardians of peace for millennia, were placed in command of the clone forces. This was a role they accepted reluctantly, understanding that war was antithetical to their principles. Despite their reservations, they became military leaders, directing campaigns across the galaxy. In doing so, the Jedi unknowingly played into the hands of their greatest enemy. They failed to perceive the inherent danger in leading a force that was ultimately outside their control. The trust placed in the clone army was not solely the result of political naivety. It was a calculated move by Palpatine, who used the crisis to consolidate power. Through masterful manipulation, he convinced the Senate and the public that the clone army was the Republic's only hope for survival. Each victory on the battlefield, each heroic act performed by the clones, further solidified their indispensable status. Meanwhile, Palpatine's grip on the Republic tightened, and the foundations of democracy eroded under the guise of wartime necessity. In the final stages of the war, the Jedi began to sense that something was amiss. Their connection to the Force revealed a growing darkness, but the truth eluded them. By the time they realized the depth of the conspiracy, it was too late. The execution of Order 66 was swift and devastating. In an instant, the Jedi were declared traitors, and the clones, without hesitation, turned their weapons on their former allies. The very soldiers the Republic had trusted to defend its ideals became instruments of its subjugation. This betrayal was not the result of malice on the part of the clones. They were victims of the same manipulation that ensnared the Republic. Their loyalty, so celebrated during the war, was the mechanism of their control. They had no choice but to obey the directive embedded within their minds. The Republic's fatal flaw was its failure to question this loyalty, to see beyond the immediate utility of the clone army and recognize the potential for its exploitation. When the dust settled, the Republic was gone, replaced by the Galactic Empire. The Senate, the Jedi, and the ideals of democracy were swept away in a tide of authoritarian rule. The clone army, once hailed as the saviors of the Republic, became enforcers of tyranny. Their presence, once reassuring, now served as a stark reminder of the Republic's greatest error. The trust in the clone army was not just a tactical or strategic miscalculation, it was a moral failure. The Republic's leaders, in their desperation to preserve order, compromised the very values they sought to protect. This trust blinded them to the possibility that such a force could be turned against them, that their reliance on engineered soldiers could be exploited by a cunning adversary. In the end, the clone army did not just fail the Republic, it ensured its destruction. The transition from Republic to Empire was not a sudden upheaval, but rather the culmination of a long and calculated manipulation. The trust in the clone army was emblematic of a larger pattern, the gradual erosion of democratic safeguards in favor of centralized control. Every step the Republic took towards militarization and authoritarian governance was framed as a necessary response to the crises at hand. This narrative, masterfully spun by Palpatine, justified actions that would have been unthinkable in a time of peace. As the Clone Wars dragged on, the Republic's institutions became increasingly subservient to the military apparatus. The Senate, once a vibrant forum for debate and diplomacy, devolved into little more than a rubber stamp for Palpatine's decrees. Emergency powers were granted with alarming frequency, each one eroding the principles of self-governance and accountability. These powers were ostensibly temporary, meant to address the immediate threat posed by the separatists. Yet, as the war escalated, they became permanent fixtures of the political landscape. The Jedi, too, were swept up in this tide. Their role as peacekeepers was supplanted by that of warriors. The war demanded their full attention, leaving little room for introspection or dissent. While some Jedi, like Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi, expressed unease about the direction the Republic was heading, their concerns were drowned out by the cacophony of war. The Jedi Council, bound by its duty to the Republic, struggled to reconcile its traditional values with the demands of leadership in a galaxy at war. Palpatine's strategy relied on the Jedi's cooperation. By placing them in command of the clone army, he ensured they would be implicated in the Republic's militarization. This association served a dual purpose. It legitimized the clones in the eyes of the public and tied the Jedi's fate to the military's success. As the war intensified, any failure or perceived betrayal by the Jedi could be framed as a threat to the Republic's survival. This narrative was crucial in setting the stage for their eventual downfall. The Republic's dependence on the clone army was not purely logistical, it was psychological. The clones were a symbol of hope, a tangible representation of the Republic's resolve. They embodied the ideal of unity in the face of adversity, standing as a bulwark against the chaos of the separatist movement. This symbolism was so powerful that it blinded many to the inherent risks of relying on a force bred for absolute obedience. The seeds of this trust were sown early in the war. The clones' initial victories, such as the defense of Kamino and the Battle of Geonosis, were celebrated as triumphs of Republic ingenuity and resolve. These successes were used to justify further investment in the clone army, solidifying its role as the Republic's primary line of defense. Each new campaign brought with it a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper reliance on the clones. Yet beneath this facade of unity and strength, the Republic's foundations were crumbling. Order 66 was not merely a tactical maneuver, it was the culmination of a psychological war waged by Palpatine. For years, he had cultivated an atmosphere of fear and suspicion, painting the Jedi as potential threats to stability. By the time the order was given, the groundwork had been laid. The public, conditioned by years of propaganda and wartime rhetoric, was primed to accept the narrative of Jedi treat. The clones, acting without hesitation, carried out their orders with the same precision and efficiency that had earned them the Republic's trust. The execution of Order 66 was devastating in its scope and efficiency. Jedi across the galaxy were ambushed and killed by the very troops they had fought alongside. On Coruscant, the Jedi Temple was stormed, its defenders overwhelmed by the sheer might of the clone forces. In a matter of days, the Jedi Order, once the guardians of peace and justice, was reduced to a handful of survivors scattered across the stars. The fall of the Jedi was not merely a military defeat, it was a profound betrayal. The clones, whose loyalty had been their greatest virtue, revealed themselves as instruments of a hidden agenda. This betrayal was not the result of individual malice, but of a systemic manipulation that had been in place since their inception. The Republic's leaders, in their desperation to preserve order, had placed their trust in a force they did not fully understand. This trust, exploited by Palpatine, became the means by which the Republic was dismantled. In the aftermath of Order 66, the Republic was no more. Its institutions, hollowed out by years of war and political manipulation, were easily subsumed into the structure of the Galactic Empire. The Senate, once the heart of democratic governance, was reduced to a ceremonial body, its powers stripped away. The ideals of liberty and justice, which had once defined the Republic, were replaced by the oppressive doctrines of the Empire. The clone army, now serving as enforcers of the Emperor's will, became a symbol of the Republic's failure. Their presence, once a source of pride, was now a reminder of the Republic's greatest mistake. The trust that had been placed in them, the belief that they would safeguard the Republic's ideals, had been tragically misplaced. In the end, the clone army did not protect the Republic, it ensured its demise.